I was rinsing the last plate when the phone on the dining table went to speaker, and a rush of parking lot sound spilled into the kitchen. The car must have taken over the audio the moment she slid behind the wheel. I tapped mute on my side and stood very still while the hollow cabin sound of their car did my hearing for me. Natalie called me dead weight and talked about listing our house so they could get to Scottsdale before summer was over. Evan answered in that careful pitch he uses when he thinks he is smoothing a deal, saying our house again and promising he would handle a realtor. It sounded like a plan spoken out loud by people who had rehearsed it in quiet rooms that did not include me. The old reflex from my years in bank compliance woke up before the hurt did. Identify the risk, preserve the record, secure the perimeter. I shut off the water, dried my hands, and crossed the living room to the shelf where a clear binder holds the papers that matter. I slid the deed far enough out to see the county stamp and the recording date. I put the deed back in its sleeve and carried the binder to the table. If they were going to say our house out loud, the answer would be paper and process that did not raise a voice. I opened the file drawer and pulled what the next 2 weeks would need. I lined them along the dining table in clean rows the way I used to lay out exceptions in an audit room. Linda's photo watched from the built-in bookcase. I did not call Natalie. I did not call Evan. The line finally dropped on its own, and the green bar slid away. I set the phone face down and walked a slow lap through the house, taking inventory the way an underwriter would when an applicant swears everything is fine. The kitchen that finally worked the way she wanted after we moved the refrigerator to the opposite wall and widened the doorway by the pantry. In the hallway, a framed photo of Sophie on her first day of kindergarten, one front tooth missing, and a grin that refused to be self-conscious. The piano near the thermostat, with a sheet of scales on the stand, and a pink sticker on the measure she keeps missing. Back at the table, I pulled a yellow legal pad and made a list with a steady hand. Realtor who can bring a cash buyer, so there is no lender to invite delay and no appraisal to turn into another argument. Title company to open escrow and search the chain of title and order a status letter from the HOA before anyone claims a surprise balance. Bank to set up private banking with 2-factor authentication and a passphrase only I know, so any incoming funds arrive clean. Doctor to complete a capacity evaluation, so no one can stand in front of a judge and say, I should not make my own decisions. I will not argue. I will not explain. I will act. I flipped the deadbolt and leaned the door into its frame until the sound stopped. Linda used to hang glass feeders near the porch, and on late afternoons, hummingbirds would come close enough that you could hear the small zipper of their wings. I sorted the folders again, this time moving the essentials into the clear binder, and left a sticky note on the HOA file to request a status letter the same day we opened escrow. Clean files, close arguments. I stood in front of Linda's photo and gave myself 1 full minute to miss her. Choose better words, she would say, without speaking. Set a boundary you can live with. You cannot persuade someone who has already decided what you are worth. You can refuse to cross the line yourself, and you can refuse to let them cross it either. I thought of Natalie at 19, furious, because I would not co-sign a car loan she could not afford, and the coffee she placed beside my chair the next morning, as if to say, I know you are right, and I hate it. I thought of Evan, who presents every idea as if it were a plan finished 5 minutes ago, confident enough to sell it, vague enough to escape it. I thought of Sophie counting to 4 under her breath when she works a hard passage jaw set until practice turns a snarl into a song. Tonight, I believed what I heard, and I chose what to do with it. I checked that the phone would behave the way I needed in the morning. Attorney first. Realtor next. Title after that. Bank and then doctor. Show up with your sequence clear, and other people have less room to shuffle you. I set an alarm for 8 in the morning. I placed the binder in the small fire safe in the closet under the stairs and spun the dial until the latch fell. I left the legal pad on the dining table with a pen across it, ready for the day to start. At the front door, I checked the lock and pressed my palm to the cool surface the way I have done every night since Linda's funeral. It is just a way to tell the body to close the day. In the bedroom, I turned off the lamp and lay still with the fan drawing a slow circle. Somewhere along Airport Boulevard, a car shifted gears and faded. Scottsdale could think whatever it wanted. Tomorrow would be hours of small, steady steps. A list, a clock, a door that locks. I kept those 3 simple things in my mind until the numbers behind my eyelids stopped flickering and the house settled into its nighttime shape. I brewed coffee dressed in a plain blue shirt and put the clear binder into a canvas bag. I laid the deed on the table and the most recent tax bill and the HOA letter that proves I am in good standing. He said the title shows me as the sole owner and that there is no recorded lien and no joint tenancy to cloud it. He said my daughter and her husband have no authority to list or sell or encumber the property without my written consent. He looked up and asked what had happened. I told him the short version and left out every adjective. He said this is how we will do it. We will ask a realtor to bring a cash buyer so there is no lender and no appraisal. We will put a post-occupancy addendum in the contract that gives me 30 days to remain after closing. We will include language that allows me to change locks during that period for security and that confirms all utilities remain in my name until I hand over possession. We will limit any camera to common areas and we will keep a log of notifications so there is no question about notice later. He said we will open escrow with a title officer he trusts at Travis County Title, and we will request the HOA status letter on day 1 so no one can claim a surprise balance. A clause said he does not become my counsel on anything outside the real estate matter without a new agreement. He recommended a capacity evaluation with a geriatrician and offered 2 names. I said I already knew who I wanted, and that I would ask for the first available slot with Dr. Priya Raman at Baylor Scott & White. Before I took the cards, I said my neighbor Ruth had mentioned someone named Paige Monroe, who closes clean and fast. He told me to call her today and set an appointment for tomorrow so we could move while the calendar was still on our side. He said I will inventory anything that belongs to Natalie and Evan, and I will store it at a reputable facility for 30 days. He said I will send an email and a certified letter with the inventory and the pickup instructions, and I will keep the proof of mailing and the delivery receipt with my file. I asked him what he wanted from me between now and Monday. He wanted me to let the process carry the weight and not chase a confrontation. And he wanted me to text him if there was any contact from Natalie or Evan that suggested a plan to interfere. He said a judge is more impressed by a clean file than by a loud speech, and I felt the knot between my shoulders drop 1 notch. We would get a medical capacity letter, and we would lead with a contract that leaves no room for panic. I told him I was a bank compliance officer for 3 decades, and that sequences are the only reason systems work at all. I sat in the car and wrote down what we decided so it would live on paper and not swim in memory. I left Paige a message that I had a property in Muller with clean title and that I needed an in-person walkthrough on Saturday morning if she could make it. I dialed the Baylor scheduling line and asked for Dr. Raman's first available appointment for a cognitive and functional evaluation. I forwarded the confirmation to Thomas with a short note that said this part is handled. I do not gain anything by replaying an insult. At a red light, I imagined Sophie at the piano bench, counting in a whisper, shoulders lifted, then dropping as the measure finally clicks. At home, I spread the engagement letter, and my notes on the dining table, and then put them into the binder with the deed and the tax bills. I printed the last 10 years of HOA statements from my online account and stapled the confirmation screen that shows a zero balance. Before lunch, I called the Mueller HOA office and asked what they needed from me to issue a formal status letter fast, once the title company requested it. The man on the phone gave me a short list and an email address, and said if I sent the information Monday morning, he would be ready when the title request arrived. The phone buzzed with a text from Paige. She had attached a short list of items she likes to see ready before an investor walk through. Utility history, major system dates, and a list of improvements with receipts. That small courtesy told me more about her work than a brochure ever could. I ate a sandwich standing up, then washed the plate and set it in the rack to dry. I walked to the piano and set the metronome on the lid. The light from the front windows fell across the keys in a pattern that made me think of staff paper. I did not touch the instrument. It felt like a promise I needed to keep by not making a sound. In the afternoon, I called North Loop Storage to ask about unit sizes and their process for inventory and photos. The manager, named Leo, said they provide bar-coded labels and a simple spreadsheet template, and that they keep a scanned copy of the signed inventory for 30 days after intake. He said if I needed a certified letter mailed to the recipients, they could handle that for a fee. I told him I might take him up on that, and I wrote his name on the storage tab in my binder. By late day, the house had the neat look of a file ready for review. The binder sat by the front door, and my list had more check marks than blanks. I brewed tea and sat in Linda's chair and let the quiet do its work. I did not feel triumphant. I felt anchored. Tomorrow, a realtor would walk through my house with a camera and a notebook and a plan. Monday, a doctor would ask me to remember 3 words and draw a clock and answer a few simple questions. Tuesday, the title search would begin. It was not heroism. It was a sequence. I stood and turned off the kitchen light and watched the room hold its shape in the softer shade of evening. Paige Monroe stood on the porch with a small camera bag and a slim folder tucked under her arm. She said the neighborhood was moving on tight inventory and that buyers wanted clean mechanicals and light. She asked when we moved the refrigerator, and I said 2015. She asked for the permit, and I slid the copy with the contractor invoice across the island. She said, if we present clean photos and a strong document packet and lead with a cash conversation, we can expect offers between 900 and 920, depending on speed. She said the investor group she trusts most is Lone Star Property Group because they close without drama if the title is clean and the contract is explicit. She asked whether I preferred certainty over squeezing a little more out of the number. I said speed is a kindness when a family is already overheated. I told her what I needed written in the contract. She said those terms are standard for the investor she had in mind, and she writes them every month. She asked whether I had counsel, and I gave her Thomas Nguyen's card. Paige saw the movement of my hand at the piano program and said we can schedule any walkthroughs so that nothing important to the child is touched or moved. She asked me to email digital copies by the afternoon so she could format and send a teaser to Lone Star by evening. She said she expected a response on Sunday and that if they passed, she had 2 other cash buyers who trust her when she says a file is clean. We discussed photos. She would take preliminary shots for investors now and bring a photographer only if we went to the broader market. She asked me to slide personal things out of any potential frame. I looked at the piano and said the program stays until after the recital. She said the piano would not appear in investor photos and that a piece of paper can stay where it belongs. She asked how I wanted to handle communication with Natalie and Evan. I said that all notices will be in writing and that Thomas will advise on tone and timing. I told her I plan to inventory anything of theirs and store it at North Loop Storage for 30 days and send both email and certified letter with pickup instructions and proof of mailing. She said that plan strengthens the contract because it shows respect for possession and reduces the oxygen available for conflict. She asked whether I had spoken with the title company. I said I planned to call Carla Mendoza at Travis County Title on Monday to open escrow and request the HOA status letter. Paige typed Carla's name and said she liked working with her. I could feel the rooms loosen their shoulders as the plan took air. Paige walked to the front room to take a few wide shots. She kept the camera low so the lines of the floor would carry the eye forward. She took corners that most phones miss. She photographed the HVAC sticker and the shutoff valve tucked behind the unit that an inspector would appreciate. She never asked me to move. She circled me as if a careful person might be a fixture worth keeping. When she finished, we reviewed the number she would float. $910,000 for a cash offer, with a short timeline, closing in 8 to 10 business days as long as title is clean and the HOA letter arrives without delay. Post-occupancy language in the first contact, and the lock change terms spelled out, so there is no claim of surprise. I told her I agreed with every line and asked that she copy Thomas on the outreach to the investor so counsel is awake from the first minute. She closed the laptop and stepped out of the booties near the door. She thanked me for the coffee and said she would text within the hour with a brief list of electronic documents she needed. She paused and asked whether I was ready for the particular hush that arrives when strangers begin to imagine your rooms as theirs. I said I had been ready since last night. She nodded, as if that answer matched what she had already seen in the neat rows of paper. After she left the house, kept a working quiet, not the hush of evening, and not the hollow after an argument, but the low murmur of a shop at the start of a project. I gathered the digital files into one folder and sent them in order. Roof inspection, kitchen permit, HVAC invoice, utility history, HOA statement with a zero balance. Each confirmation ping landed like a small nail driven true. On the piano, I set the recital program back exactly where it had been. Sophie had placed a tiny star next to her piece with a pink pen. I traced it with my eyes and felt the tension in my chest loosen a fraction. The plan for the house could move forward, and the promise to the child could stand next to it without being crushed. Late morning light stretched across the floor and rested there as if it too had been given a job. Paige's email carried Lone Star's offer for $910,000 cash as his closing in 8 to 10 business days with 30 days of post-occupancy and lock change language. On the phone, I told her my conditions were straight. Utilities would stay in my name until possession ended. I would change locks on day one for safety, and I would inventory anything of Natalie and Evan's store at 30 days and send both email and certified letters with pickup instructions and proof of mailing. She agreed to write it exactly that way and to copy Thomas on every message. Within the hour, the signature packet arrived. I reviewed the terms, confirmed the legal description matched the deed, and signed the offer and the post-occupancy addendum. I forwarded the entire chain to Thomas, and he replied that he would open a file and draft a notice template for storage and inventory. Paige followed with timing. Earnest money would go to escrow the next business day. The contract had been sent to Carla at Travis County Title, and a three-way thread was open so no one chased contacts. I gathered what title would want. Recorded deed, last fall's roof report, the 2015 kitchen permit, and invoiced the 2020 HVAC invoice with serial number 12 months of utilities and an HOA account screen showing 0. I saved them to a thumb drive and emailed copies to myself as backup. The binder waited by the door with the drive inside. At Travis County Title on Monday, Carla reviewed the contract and confirmed the structure. Cash as is no appraisal post-occupancy for 30 days with the lock change provision. Escrow would open immediately, and the title search would be ordered at once. I chose an incoming wire to my Hill Country bank account for closing funds. She explained they would release the wire the moment the file funded, and that when my bank posted it could vary by a day in practice. There were no loans or liens to report. I gave her the Mueller HOA contact and account details so the status letter request could go out as soon as the file opened. I handed over the inspection and permit copies. She built a tidy packet and printed a preliminary seller net sheet with price tax and dues prorations, title fees, and an estimated net to wire. I checked each line and initialed to show review. She said earnest money would make the calendar feel real as soon as it posted and listed what she needed before closing. My ID was already scanned. We confirmed the mailing address for post-closing documents. She took down the utilities so the post-occupancy period would be documented cleanly. We set expectations on timing. If the search was clean by Wednesday and the HOA letter hit Thursday morning, we could credibly target Friday, June 20th. Recording and bank timing could push funds late in the day or to the following morning, and my banker already knew to expect the file. Carla would be my single point of contact and would copy her assistant so nothing sat in an inbox during a signing. She slid a checklist across the table with dates beside each box. Open file and order search today. Request HOA letter today. Receive earnest money within 1 business day. Preliminary commitment by Wednesday. Target closing Friday the 20th. Record the post-occupancy agreement with the deed. I signed the escrow instructions, and we shook hands. In the car, I wrote the dates in my notebook, so the plan lived on paper. I left Paige a quick confirmation that escrow was open and told Thomas the search and HOA request were in motion. Back home, I placed Carla's checklist on the binder and checked the first 2 boxes as markers. I drafted an email to the HOA contact with the items he had requested on Friday and left it in my outbox to send the moment title's request posted so the timing would match. The calendar had a clear target now, and the house seemed to acknowledge it. For the first time in months, I did not feel like I was defending a shoreline. I felt ready for the next step to land exactly where we had drawn it. She asked for 3 words and told me I would hear that request again before we finished. She asked me to draw a clock and put hands at a certain hour. She asked about my day, who I saw, what I did after breakfast. She asked me to stand and walk across the room, turn and come back. She said the written report would be ready tomorrow, a clean letter that says capacity is intact and that her office would send me a PDF and a printed copy if I wanted one for an old-fashioned file. The next morning, I walked into Hill Country Bank on 2nd Street and asked for Dana Whitaker. Donna met me with a warm grip and a stack of documents already bank-clipped. She said we would set up a private banking account, add 2-factor authentication to wall access, create a passphrase. Only I would know for any voice interactions, and set me up with a safe deposit box for documents that should not live in a drawer at home. She said on closing day, the title office would release funds by wire to this routing and account number, and that the bank would mark it as incoming and make it available as soon as their system cleared it. We walked to the vault, and a clerk handed me a small brass key. Dana left me alone in a booth with a metal box that slid out of the wall like a drawer in a good toolbox. I set Linda's death certificate, the deed copy, the roof inspection, and a sheet with 3 contacts on the gray surface. Back in her office, Dana asked about timing. I said the target closing is Friday the 20th if title and HOA cooperate. She nodded and said she would mark the account for expected incoming funds that week and would call me the moment the wire landed. She said they had already begun the background check that confirms I am who I say I am, and that nothing in my past will cause a hold. Before I left, she asked if there was anything else to consider. I said I was thinking about a small scholarship in Linda's name, at a local fund, the kind that buys a set of books and a year of peace for a kid who reads as if the page is oxygen. Donna said she would introduce me to a director she trusted when the dust settled. We shook hands like colleagues finishing a piece of work rather than people performing gratitude. In the car, I opened my phone and called Sophie. The ring dragged a little, and then her voice came in bright and proud. She said she had almost nailed the hard measure and that the pink sticker might come off before the recital if she could play it twice clean. I told her that sounded like a plan even a bank would fund. She laughed at the joke the way a child laughs when an adult reaches across a gap without making a big ceremony of it. She asked if I would be there. I told her that I intended to sit very still in the back row and clap like a metronome that lost its mind. She said good and said she had to practice now, or her teacher would hear the fuzz and make her start over. When the screen went dark, I sat with the tilt of joy and ache that a grandparent never quite explains to anyone. I looked at my hands on the steering wheel and saw the lines of work and the small tremor that only shows up when I hold a thing too lightly. I spoke to myself in the voice Linda used when I was being stubborn for sport. Hold the line, Richard. Make the rules do their job. Let the child stay a child. Back at home, I found an email from Dr. Rahman's office with a link to the PDF. Capacity intact, it said, in the plain language a court respects. I printed 2 copies, slid one into the binder, and wrote a small note on the other that said safe box and an arrow. I put the note on top of the pile I would take to the bank the next morning. Thomas replied to my earlier message with a smile in the rhythm of his words. He said the medical letter closes a door that people often try to pry with feelings. He attached a simple template for storage notices and a list of phrases that stop a conversation from wandering into apology. Late afternoon brought a text from Paige. She said the investor had confirmed receipt of the signed packet and had already pushed earnest money to escrow. She would verify posting in the morning and would let me know when Carla marked it in the file. The house answered with a silence that felt like a bracket around a paragraph. I made a simple dinner and ate at the counter with the binder open. I checked the 2-factor app on my phone and signed into the new account, just to watch the codes do their small act of protection. I placed the little brass key to the safe deposit box beside my watch, so I would not forget it in the morning. I wrote a tiny list on a sticky note, because sometimes the small ones are better than the grand. Bank box copy placed. Send capacity PDF to Thomas. Confirm with Carla that the file has the letter if she wants it for the packet. As the light shifted toward evening, I stood at the piano and read the program again. The tiny star next to the piece had not moved. I thought of the cost of peace and how often it is paid in small decisions made quietly. I thought of Natalie as a girl at the kitchen table banging through her multiplication and glaring at me as if numbers were my invention and not the world's. I thought of Evan and the floating plans that never seemed to need a calendar. I felt anger try to rise and I told it to sit down. Rules would do this work. I did not need to rehearse speeches for an audience that would not listen. Night came early in my mind, even if the clock disagreed. I stacked the papers I would carry to the bank and put the binder by the door. I washed the pan and set it to dry. When I turned out the kitchen light, the room held itself without help. My phone buzzed once with an email from Dana. The subject line said onboarding complete and the first line said pre-cleared for incoming wire. I read it twice and let my breath go all the way down to the floor. Then I set the phone face down and let the house be a house. The next step would arrive in the morning, and I would meet it at the vault with a small brass key and a page that said what it needed to say. I drove back to Hill Country Bank with the capacity letter printed on crisp paper and the brass key in my pocket. Dana met me at the lobby desk long enough to say the account flag for incoming funds was live and that her team would call the instant a wire showed up on their screen. At home, I made coffee and opened my email. The association had returned a preliminary response that showed a past due balance of $1,180 and a note that said clearance could not be issued until the account was current. Carla wrote that she had asked for a ledger and that I should review my records in case there was a misapplied payment or an old assessment that never closed. I pulled the HOA folder and the old banker boxes from the hall closet and set them on the dining table. I had paid both parts regular dues and the one-time assessment by bank bill pay. The portal had credited one payment to the wrong month and left the assessment floating. I opened a spreadsheet and made a quick reconciliation that ran from 2015 to the present, with a line for every payment and a column for the association's posted amount. The math closed perfectly for every year once the orphaned assessment was placed where it belonged. Then I drafted a short email to the association contact, copied Carla, and asked for a corrected ledger and a clearance letter once their books reflected the fix. An hour later, a reply arrived from a man named Brent Hall, who introduced himself as the current HOA president. He thanked me for the detailed reconciliation and said the records from the old management company had been migrated to a new platform years ago and that a few accounts still showed ghosts when auditors ran a query. He said he had forwarded my package to the community manager and their accountant and that he expected a corrected ledger by morning. Sophie had drawn our live oak in green crayon, with two small figures under it, one tall with a gray head, one shorter with a bright dress, both with round hands reaching toward a bird feeder. By mid-afternoon, Carla sent a short update. The earnest money had posted. Title had the order number for the search, and the request for the HOA letter had been logged. She would watch for the corrected ledger in the morning and would ping me if the association lagged. I wrote a note to myself to call the HOA office if 9 o'clock arrived without an email. Tuesday morning, I was at the table before the coffee had finished. At 9:15, I called the HOA office and asked for Brent. He said their accountant had found the migration error and that the ledger would be corrected as soon as the manager signed off. I said I appreciated his speed and that I would stand by for the letter. 10:30 brought an email with a fresh PDF. Account paid through June 2025. No outstanding balance. A note that any resale certificate fee would be handled at closing, but that no delinquency existed. A separate letter on association letterhead that used the word cleared in exactly the sentence a title office likes to see. Carla responded within minutes that she had placed both documents in the file and marked the HOA condition satisfied. I printed the clearance letter and slid it into the binder. I added a sticky that said, "Take to signing," because there is no such thing as too many reminders when a stack of papers begins to breathe. I sent Brent a short thank you and copied Carla so the thread would sit in the same file as the ledger. He replied that he hoped the birds in the backyard were still showing up this time of day. I looked out the window toward the feeders and felt the small weight of gratitude drop into place. With the HOA piece quieted, I called Thomas to report the fix. He listened, asked 2 precise questions about dates and amounts, and said that was exactly how he wanted it to land. He said the next days would belong to title and to patience. He reminded me to forward him any contact from Natalie or Evan and to let their words live in his inbox instead of in my head. The reminder landed where it should. The rest of the day moved in clean lines. I scanned the signed clearance and backed up the digital file. I reviewed the title checklist and put small checks by items already in place. I stood for a long minute with my hand on the binder as if it were a rail on a staircase. It is an odd thing to anchor yourself with paper, but it works. Linda would have told me to eat something and go outside again. I listened. In the late afternoon, a sparrow found the feeder, and the air made that zip sound that always makes me think of summer as a boy. A breeze moved the oak leaves just enough to make a pattern on the floor. The house felt less like a site of contest and more like a room that knew the next task by heart. My phone buzzed with a calendar reminder for the end of the week, and I cleared it without reading the label. Some reminders are better as a bell than a sentence. Near dusk, I placed the binder by the door again. I put Sophie's drawing on the top page where I would see it first. I set the small brass key on the table beside my watch. The day had begun at a vault and ended with a letter that said a balance was 0. In between, I had watched a system that often gets in its own way make a correction when shown the right page. I turned off the kitchen light and let the rooms rest in their work. A firm knock sounded just after 9, and I opened the door to a woman with a leather folder and a calm face. She introduced herself as Keisha Turner from Adult Protective Services and said they had received an anonymous concern about my well-being. She asked if I had a few minutes to visit. I stepped back and waved her in. She asked how I manage meals. She asked about medication. She asked whether I had working smoke alarms. She asked if the kitchen had any safety features. She looked at the stairs and asked about falls. I said the primary bedroom is on the first floor and that the only time I use the stairs is to fetch a box from storage. She asked if I had a point of contact for emergencies. I gave her a printed list with Thomas Nguyen Carla at the title office and Donna at the bank plus Ruth next door. I told her someone had made a suggestion that did not match the deed and that I had chosen to handle it through counsel and process. She asked if I felt safe in my home until the sale closed. I said I did. Then I handed her a copy of the capacity letter from Dr. Priya Raman. She asked if I could show her a few practical things around the kitchen so she could check a box on the form. She asked permission to speak briefly with a neighbor. She said based on what she had seen and the documents provided, she would close the case as safe living and would send a short written confirmation for my records within a day or two. At the door, she paused and said, "Anonymous tips can come from a place of care and sometimes from a place of leverage." I thanked her for being the kind of person who lets a file speak for itself. After she left, I stood for a moment in the entry and let my breath settle. I made coffee and opened my email. Carla had sent a short note that the HOA clearance letter was in the file and that the title search was in progress. She said she would send the preliminary commitment as soon as it posted and that the earnest money was already visible in escrow. I wrote back that Dana at the bank had pre-cleared my account and would call when the wire hit. I called the bank and asked for Dana. She picked up and said she had already marked my file for a Friday funding expectation, with the caveat that the Juneteenth holiday on Thursday could push wire timing toward late afternoon. She said their practice is to make wires available as soon as possible, often the same day, but that sometimes a posting lands after internal cutoff and becomes available the next morning. She said she would have someone watch the screen and she would call me personally when it arrived. After lunch, I printed a fresh copy of the capacity letter and walked it to the safe deposit box so the file in the vault matched the file at home. Sophie had drawn the live oak again this time, with little music notes bouncing off the branches. In the afternoon, I took out the laptop and opened the securities regulator site that keeps public records on brokers. I typed Evan's name and scrolled through until the entry with the disciplinary mark appeared. I printed the summary and the relevant page with the date from last summer. I set the printouts under the tab marked Mediation so that when a neutral asked for context, I would hand the pages over without commentary. I boiled pasta, ate quietly at the counter, and washed the bowl the way Linda used to, when she did not want to leave a single dish for morning. I let the day's small victories sit where they belonged. A state office had looked and found safety. A title office had checked and found zero. A bank had set a light to watch for a number. Just before dark, the phone buzzed with an email from Keisha. She wrote that the APS case was closed as safe and that no further action was required. She attached a one-page letter on agency letterhead with my name spelled correctly and the file number in the top corner. I printed it and slid it behind the capacity letter in the binder. There is a certain weight to paper that says no and yes in the right places. It makes the floor feel level. I set the binder by the door and walked to the piano. The metronome sat quiet with the arm tilted like a shoulder ready to shrug. I thought about Sophie counting under her breath and the small lift in her chin when a measure finally lines up with her hands. I thought about tomorrow and the conversation I would not avoid and the words I would keep shorter than the problem. Then I turned off the lamp and watched the room accept darkness without losing its borders. The day had begun with a knock and ended with a one-page letter that said, "A stranger had looked and found things sound." That felt like a good place to stop moving. I put on a plain shirt, slid the binder into my canvas bag, and drove to the Community Mediation Center off Manor Road. Thomas had counseled me by email the night before. Natalie and Evan arrived together and sat opposite me. A man in his late 60s introduced himself as Samuel Ortega, a retired judge who now volunteers on Saturdays because, as he put it in a voice that told stories without drama, he believes rooms like this can save families from their worst instincts. He asked each of us to speak in turn first, to describe the problem, then to describe what we wanted. I said the house in Muller is my property. The deed shows a single owner. Me and I have chosen to sell it to a cash buyer. I said the closing process is underway through Travis County Title with a post-occupancy addendum that gives me 30 days in the house after closing and the right to change locks for security during that period. I said I will inventory any belongings of Natalie and Evan and store them for 30 days with written notice and proof of mailing. I said I am not a burden, and I am not available for anyone else to list or sell my property. My relationship with Sophie stands apart from all of this. He asked Natalie to describe what she wanted. She said they had been talking about Scottsdale and schools and a yard, and that the house felt like a shared future. She said they were worried about me, that I forget things, that the stove was left on once. He said the market was right for a sale and that we could all benefit from a structured plan. He outlined a family fund idea, proceeds managed by him, distributions for my care surplus for a new place for them, efficiencies, tax advantages. When he finished, I opened the binder and slid across the table a printout from the public regulator site, the entry with the disciplinary mark dated last August. Samuel asked us to return to the core. He asked what would make this tolerable over the next month. All communication in writing through counsel. No attempts to enter the house without my permission. No attempts to list or market the property. Respect for the storage plan and the notice process. An agreement on how I will see Sophie that is not tied to any financial decision. He turned to Natalie and Evan. They asked to keep a set of keys, which I declined. They asked to be notified of showings, which I declined, because this was already under contract with an investor, and there would be no open house to walk through. They asked to approve the buyer, which I declined, because a sale is between a seller and a buyer, not a committee of relatives. He would oversee a short-term trust to prove his good faith with me as the beneficiary. He proposed a schedule that guarantees my time with Sophie, independent of any money. Every other Sunday afternoon in a public place of my choosing, plus attendance at the recital on June 25, plus a phone call midweek at a set hour. Communication about the child by text or email only. No attachments that sound like arguments. She said she did not want to lock anything in while things were unsettled. She said it felt like rewarding me for being difficult. He explained that a child needs predictability more than adults need vindication. He said we could write a simple one-page agreement for the next 6 weeks and revisit after that. Evan broke it by shifting back to numbers. He said we were leaving money on the table by not testing the broader market. He said he had friends who could push for a higher offer. Samuel asked if there was any scenario in which I would delay closing to seek a higher price. I said no, and I said it the way a safe shuts. He turned back to the child. He said he would like us to agree today on the recital and on 2 Sunday afternoons before then. Natalie looked at Evan. He shrugged in a way that said he did not want to be the one to sign his name to a kindness with no leverage. Natalie said she could not commit without speaking to someone. The someone went unnamed. I stepped into the hallway and rinsed my hands at a water fountain that looked like every school I ever walked through. Linda would have said what she always said when a bright student chose a lazy line. Choose better words. Choose them now or choose them later, but choose them. We reconvened. Samuel summarized where we stood. The sale would proceed. The house would be secure under the post-occupancy addendum locks to be changed on day 1 for safety. The association balance had been cleared, and title work was in motion. On the matter of the child, he said he would record that I had agreed to a simple schedule and that Natalie had declined to commit at this time. He asked if anyone had anything more to add. I did, and it was brief. I said I would attend the recital on June 25. I said if anyone attempted to interfere with lawful access to the event, I would not argue in public. I would go home and call my attorney. I said I would continue to send all notices in writing and would not engage in ad hoc conversations that put feelings ahead of facts. Samuel wrote the words as if they belonged to a standard he admired. He closed the session with the kind of tidy generosity that makes a hard morning feel less sharp. He said rooms like this are often better at preventing disasters than at making miracles. He said in his experience the work is to leave with fewer ways to hurt each other than you arrived with. I thanked him for the steady hand. Natalie avoided my eyes. Evan gathered his papers, as if gathering proof that the day had not gone his way. I walked to the car and sat with the air on low until the fog on the windshield cleared. My hands were steady. I sent Thomas a short email from the parking lot. Mediation concluded. Sale proceeds as planned. Child schedule proposed and declined. No agreements signed. Attachments included capacity letter, APS closure, HOA clearance, broker discipline summary. He replied minutes later. Understood. Proceed with the sequence. Forward any contact. He did not add a single extra word. On the way home, I stopped at a grocery store for ice and a lemon and the makings of a simple dinner. Routine is a harness that keeps a mind from slipping. At home, I filed Samuel's mediation summary under a fresh tab. I placed Sophie's drawing on the first page so I would see it before any other piece of paper. I stood at the piano and set the metronome arm upright. The house was quiet in the way a shop is quiet, when the saw is off and the workpiece rests on the bench. A thought rose, the kind that feels like a stone in a pocket. If I agreed to a half measure today, would Sophie learn that affection lives on a price tag? The answer arrived in the same shape it had in my chest all week. No. I will not teach her that lesson. Love does not go on a ledger. I can offer time and attention and a chair in the back row. I can refuse to pay for them with equity or shame. Evening found the windows turning amber. I poured iced tea and sat in Linda's chair and let the quiet stack itself into something like strength. Tomorrow I would wake and step into the rest of the sequence. Title search, commitment, funding, locks, storage, notices. The recital date on the program held its small star. I let my eyes rest on it until the room softened and the clock in the hall took over the counting. I set the binder in the passenger seat and drove to Travis County Title with the sun still low over the live oaks. Carla met me at reception with a small stack and her yellow pad. She said the title search had come back clean, the HOA clearance was in the file, and the commitment was posted. We began with the settlement statement. Purchase price $910,000. Net amount to be wired to Hill Country Bank. I initialed each page in the lower corner. Carla slid the deed toward me with a small arrow sticker over the signature block. I signed and dated with a hand that did not shake. She passed a set of affidavits that confirm there are no undisclosed liens and no contracts lurking off to the side. Aisha took her turn sign here for the buyer entity sign again, where the post-occupancy addendum attaches sign, and initial where the lock change language lives. 30 days after closing, seller remains in possession. Utilities remain in the seller's name until keys are turned over at end of post-occupancy. Seller may change locks during that period for security. Final walkthrough to be scheduled no later than 48 hours before possession changes. Carla tapped her keyboard and said the documents would be scanned and sent to recording once the buyer funds hit the escrow account. She said her office would push the funding request immediately and would send a wire to Hill Country Bank as soon as the file balanced. I told her Donna at the bank had pre-cleared the account and would call me the moment their screen lit up. A seller's affidavit about foreign status. A notice about taxes. We worked through them in order. Aisha slid a business card across the table and said her team would coordinate with me for the final walkthrough at the end of post-occupancy. Carla asked me to confirm the address for any mailed documents and asked whether I wanted a paper check as backup if a wire had any trouble. I said, wire only. She printed a receipt for the executed documents and a copy of the settlement statement for my binder. She said she would email the wire confirmation as soon as it left her system and would call if there was any delay. My phone buzzed with a message from Carla with the subject recording queued and a line that said, funding requested. I texted Dana at the bank that the wire would be on the way within the hour, and then I set the phone face down. Back home, I set the binder on the table and opened the page where the settlement statement would live. My phone buzzed with an email from Carla. Funding sent with a reference number and a timestamp that made my shoulders drop. A minute later, the phone rang with Dana's number. She used the code word we had agreed on, and then said the wire was visible on her screen as incoming pending. She said in practice that meant the money was in the building, even if the ledger had not let it sit down yet. She said most of the time funds are fully available within the hour, but given the holiday lag, I should plan on tomorrow morning at the latest. She promised to call me the minute the status changed to available. I thanked her and wrote pending next to the wire line on my checklist, and a small arrow that curved into tomorrow. In the afternoon, I drove to the Austin Community Foundation and met with Angela Ruiz in a glass office that looked out on a courtyard full of rosemary. I told her I wanted to set up a small scholarship in Linda's name enough to buy books and give a little piece to a student who loves the page. We agreed to meet in early July to sign the papers once my wire had moved from pending to settled. I liked her immediately. On the way home, my phone buzzed again. Dana said the wire status had not flipped yet, but that their overnight process would sweep it to available by morning. She told me to sleep like a person whose money was already here because it was, and to let the ledger catch up at its pace. I told her I would try to follow that advice and meant it. Evening drew itself over the rooms with a steady hand. I made a simple dinner and ate standing up, then washed the plate and set it on the rack. I printed the wire confirmation and slid it into the binder behind the settlement statement. I wrote a small note in the margin that said, "Pending today, available tomorrow." The act of writing made the waiting feel like a part of the plan rather than an interruption. I stood in the doorway to the living room and looked at the front windows as they shifted from gold to gray. Somewhere a lawnmower coughed and went quiet. I thought of Sophie at the piano bench, working the measure with the pink star and counting under her breath without knowing that anyone was listening. I thought of Linda in that winter chair with a book and a blanket and that little smile at the corner of her mouth that meant the page had just given her a new sentence to keep. I let those pictures sit in my chest without trying to hold them in place. When the house had cooled to its evening shape, I checked my phone one last time. No new messages. I set the device face down on the counter. Tomorrow Dana would call and say the wire was free to move. Tomorrow, the notes in my binder would gain a heavier ink. For tonight, the work belonged to the clock in the bank and the quiet in my house. I turned off the kitchen light and let the dark find its corners. The day had signed what it needed to sign, and the numbers would do the rest while I slept. Morning called before the alarm with a soft ring from the phone. The wire had cleared. I showed him the post-occupancy addendum with the paragraph about security and lock changes. I unpacked a small box that had arrived 2 days ago, the camera that looks like a charger. I placed it in the outlet beside the entry table with the lens aimed to see the front door and the sweep of the living room that opens to the kitchen. I walked out and back in and checked the phone. On the dining table, I kept the letter short and clean. I wrote that the house had been sold for cash and that title had closed. I wrote that I would remain in the house for 30 days under the agreement and that for safety, the locks had been changed. I wrote that their belongings had been inventoried and placed in storage at North Loop for 30 days with a list enclosed and pickup instructions. I wrote that notice had been sent by email and by certified mail with tracking numbers provided. I wrote that my relationship with Sophie stood apart from any property matter. We walked the rooms together. I pointed to the closet where a suit bag held Evan's tux and a pair of worn loafers. I pointed to a set of training weights by the garage door and a stack of labeled bins that held holiday decor they had never taken back to their apartment. Leo lifted each item, called the name, and I typed it into his spreadsheet on a tablet he handed me. I told Leo those were coming with me in a sleeve for the binder and that I would list them in the inventory as returned to my custody for safekeeping. He nodded and typed exactly that in the notes column. In the hall closet, a soft-sided suitcase held toiletries, a hairdryer, a travel-size bottle of shampoo. We finished in the garage. Leo closed the truck and handed me a printed inventory 12 pages long, with small thumbnails of each photo next to the line items. I agreed. I said yes, and he wrote a note to have the front desk route any calls to him first. Back home, I printed the inventory and placed it behind the tab that now read storage. I kept it factual. The sale had closed. Post-occupancy was in effect. Locks had been changed pursuant to the addendum. Their belongings were at North Loop storage under unit number and barcode list attached. Pickup window 30 days from today. Facility hours and contact name listed. Copy of the inventory attached. At the mailbox, I placed 2 certified letters addressed to Natalie and Evan at their apartment in South Austin. I have learned that redundancy is not paranoia. It is courtesy to your future self. The second alert captured only my movement and not the moth. I armed the motion log and let the app display a small green dot next to the word armed. I set the phone on the console table with the screen face down so I would not watch it, as if watching could make time behave. At the door, I taped the envelope to eye level on the inside, where the first person in would see it. I stepped back and looked at the scene the way the camera sees it. Door, envelope, entry table, tree, a modest rug. The room repeated the story without my help. I spoke aloud in the empty house so that the words would settle into the walls. The work is finished. The notices are sent. The rest is a matter of people meeting paper. Evening thinned the light through the front windows. I wiped the counter and put the kettle on and let the small hiss fill the quiet. My phone buzzed with 3 emails in a row. North Loop uploaded the certified letter receipts with tracking numbers. The Postal Service confirmed acceptance at the branch. The storage account posted the full photographic inventory with timestamps. I filed each message in a folder named with today's date. Then I stood by the piano and rested a hand on the lid. The pink star on the program kept its place like it had been glued there by will. The house smelled faintly of lemon oil and dry paper. I sat in Linda's chair and watched the front door in the way a person watches a stage before the curtain lifts. The camera's green dot stayed steady. Somewhere outside, a neighbor laughed and a car door clicked shut. I breathed in and let the room hold the next hour without me narrating it. The letter waited. The file was ready. The door would open when it opened. Nothing turned. Evan set the luggage upright and pressed the doorbell. They circled to the garage. I had disabled the old remote when Marco replaced the cylinders. Natalie called out that she would try the back. She tested the kitchen window over the sink and found what I suspected she would find. She slid her forearms under the frame and pushed until the pane cleared the lock. She found the latch and opened the back door for him, as if this were an apartment they had rented for a weekend, and not a house they had already left on paper. The white envelope sat at eye level on the inside of the front door. Natalie reached first. She said, "How could he?" She said the house had been sold, and the locks had been changed, and the boxes were at North Loop for 30 days, and that she did not understand why I would be so cruel. He said the bike, the weights, the suits, the winter coats, the console, the cords, every piece already documented and photographed and stored. She said she would call me. Evan asked why she had not told him that my name alone sat on the deed. Natalie asked why he had not told her that his last firm had parted ways with him after a summer she still did not understand. He said the past year had been a string of exceptions and that they had needed a plan. Natalie reached for the 2 photos on the entry table. She put them back exactly where they had been. Then she took a breath and checked the envelope again, as if a second look could discover a secret amendment. She found the line about Sophie that I had written in a larger hand. My relationship with the child stands apart from this. She read it aloud. Evan shook his head and said that nothing stood apart anymore. The sentence hung in the air like smoke. A knock came faster than I expected. 2 officers in blue stood in the frame of the open kitchen door. The camera caught their grade school manners. Hands, visible voices, low heads tilted just enough to consider a scene rather than judge it. They listened. They glanced at the envelope. They asked if anyone else was present. Evan gestured toward the front door as if to introduce the house itself. Natalie spoke with a heat that bent the grammar of what had happened. The older officer asked for documents. Natalie pointed to the letter and said there was no document. The younger officer suggested that there might be more than one kind of document at issue. My doorbell rang a minute later. The older officer stood on my porch with the body language of someone who prefers to keep problems on sidewalks. He asked if we could talk at the threshold. I held the binder in my hand as if it were a grocery list and not a shield. He said there was a call regarding a civil matter and a possible welfare check. I said I was well, and pointed to the APS letter that sat on top. I said there was a post-occupancy agreement that gave me possession and the right to change locks. I showed him the page and let his eyes travel the lines. I showed him the deed, the settlement statement, and the wire confirmation. He nodded slowly and thanked me for being prepared. He asked if I wanted to accompany him back to the kitchen or if I preferred that he relay. I said relay because some rooms are healthier at a distance. He returned inside, and the clip caught the officer's calm voice translating law into common sense. He said the house had legally changed hands and that the seller had a lawful right to remain for a set period under a signed agreement. He said the locks were changed for security with the consent of the buyer, and that a storage facility held their belongings with a 30-day window and instructions in writing. He said this was a civil matter and not a criminal one, and that the best place for any further disagreement would be a lawyer's office, not a living room. Natalie's shoulders dropped as if someone had set a weight on them. Evan stared at the inventory list and then folded the paper very carefully. The officers waited until the air changed. They asked if there was anything else they could do. Natalie shook her head. Evan said they would leave. The older officer reminded them that re-entering by a window was no longer an option, and that they should communicate in writing as the letter requested. He looked toward the camera without looking into it, a practiced move, then nodded toward the door. They walked out with their suitcases. The camera caught the moment when the door closed behind them and when the room became empty again. I saved the clips and emailed them to Thomas with a short subject line that said, "Entry attempt and police contact all calm." I backed up the files to an external drive and placed that drive in the clear binder as if it were just another page. My phone buzzed with a last message from Natalie that contained no sentences, only a string of words that did not know where to sit. I did not reply. I watched the message collapse into a gray bubble and then into the archive. I poured water into the kettle and stood by the window while the oak outside made its slow speech in the light breeze. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once and then accepted its own advice. When the tea was ready, I carried the mug to Linda's chair and sat. The house felt strange and clean at once. The envelope had done its work. The camera had done its work. The officer's voice still lingered in the air like a note that takes a while to fade. I opened the binder to the recital program and traced the star with my eyes. The next task was not a lock or a letter. It was a chair in the back row on a Wednesday evening and a small gift that would fit in a child's hand. The room settled into its night shape. I checked the entry app one more time and saw the green dot blinking its steady reminder that some promises keep watch without talking. I placed the binder on the hall table, turned off the lamp, and let the dark make its way into the corners. Tomorrow would ask for a different kind of attention. I wanted to be rested when the music started. I set a small velvet pouch on the counter and slid a note inside it. The note said, "Play the way the tree breathes," and signed it the way Sophie asked me to sign things, with the simple word, Grandpa. Inside the pouch sat a tiny silver charm shaped like a treble clef. I arrived early at the community auditorium off Berkman. Natalie stepped in with Sophie beside her and scanned the rows. Natalie walked her to the warm-up room and disappeared. Then the name I had been waiting for came from the stage manager, with the soft authority that keeps a night on schedule. Sophie Hale to the piano. She set her fingers on the keys. I clapped until my palms stung. "Grandpa," she said, "I did not miss the hard part." I gave her the velvet pouch, and her eyes widened as if a story had just added a bright page. She said she received the letter and the storage notice and the inventory, and that everything had been very official. I said official is sometimes another word for careful. She said, I am sorry for what I said. I do not know what I was trying to do. I told her we could leave it here today and let the music be the loudest thing. Sophie tugged at my sleeve and asked if I would come outside and look at the sky because it looked like a painting at the edges. She held my hand and told me the charm would ride on her practice bag. Angela at the foundation and I met again and created a small fund in Linda's name that would buy books for a student who reads the way a thirsty person drinks. I wired a modest seed amount and set up a plan for yearly gifts. Aisha from Lone Star scheduled the final walkthrough for the last Friday of my post-occupancy. We moved through the rooms together. She thanked me for leaving the place the way a person should leave a place. I told her the middle window in the front bay likes to stick when it rains, and that a soft hand makes it behave. We stood in the living room for a long breath. I touched the piano lid with 2 fingers, and then I closed it. I locked the back door and tested it twice, and then handed Aisha the ring with the 3 new keys. I walked out the front door, turned the deadbolt, and pressed my palm to the cool wood. At the curb, I did not look back. Some scenes deserved the dignity of facing forward. I moved into a bright 1-bedroom in Hyde Park with windows that face a line of old crepe myrtles. The safe deposit box took the heavier papers. I donated the piano to a neighborhood music school in Linda's name. Natalie and I tried the schedule we had refused to write at mediation. Every other Sunday at the park with picnic tables and shade. Midweek phone calls that were sometimes 5 minutes and sometimes 15. Sophie told me about a new piece with a difficult left hand and about a science project where a bean plant did what it wanted and surprised the class. Natalie kept her sentences short and did not use the word our in reference to anything of mine. The conversation grew a little green leaf of trust in spite of us. Evan drifted to the margins. I heard from Ruth that he had taken a job farther north that did not involve other people's money. When I saw him once at the grocery store, he nodded and spoke to the floor. I nodded back and spoke to the air. He moved past me and the space stayed intact. On a quiet Tuesday, I met Dana at the bank and opened a small account labeled with the name of the reading grant so that the funds would rest where they could be counted separately. She congratulated me for making something good out of a pile of stress. I told her a brand was a loud shirt I do not want to wear. She laughed and promised to come to the small ceremony in August if her schedule cooperated. I believed her. One evening near the end of July, I sat on my new porch with a glass of iced tea and watched a neighbor water a line of zinnias with the precision of a surgeon. The phone buzzed and Sophie's name appeared. She told me she had been chosen to play one piece at a community event and that she might need a new pink star for a measure that was trying to pretend it was harder than it was. I told her I would bring a pack of stars and a pack of patience. She said that was the exact recipe her teacher had written on the board. When we hung up, I spoke out loud into the cooling air, because sometimes a man needs to hear his own voice to know what he has done. I said we had kept the rules, and the rules had kept us. I said the child had not been charged admission to a family conflict. I said, Linda, I think we managed a handoff you would have recognized. If you made it this far with me and if this story held something useful for you, I would be grateful if you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need a steady sequence when the room goes loud. Thank you for listening.